There is a moment near the end of WandaVision where Wanda sits alone in a cabin on a mountain somewhere. She is in astral form, her physical body seated at a table, her consciousness hovering above it, deep in the Darkhold. The cabin is remote. There is no one around. Outside the windows, the world is dark and cold. And inside, Wanda has what she wanted: silence, solitude, the absence of grief being witnessed by anyone who might try to take it from her. Then she hears it. Across some impossible distance, from somewhere inside the multiverse, two small voices calling for their mother. Mom, Mom. She raises her head. Her eyes go wide, and the camera holds on her face for just long enough that the audience understands. This is not peace. This is not rest. This is a new kind of suffering, more refined than any she has experienced before. She has lost her children twice now. Once when she dissolved the hex and let them go, and again 1 second later, when she heard them calling for her from somewhere she cannot reach. That is the story of Wanda Maximoff. Not the story of a powerful woman who went wrong. Not the story of a villain who repented. The story of someone who has been losing things, specific, irreplaceable things, since before she was old enough to understand what loss was. Someone who has spent 60 years of fictional history trying to find a version of the world where the things she loves do not get taken from her. The tragedy is not that she fails. The tragedy is that every time she gets close, the cost of nearly succeeding is higher than the cost of everything that came before it. Welcome to Quiet Marvel. Settle in, get comfortable, let your shoulders drop. Turn the light down low if you have not already. This one is long, and it moves slowly on purpose, so you can drift with it. Close your eyes whenever you want to. My voice will still be here. There is a version of Wanda Maximoff that almost never existed. In 1964, a writer named Stan Lee and an artist named Jack Kirby were building out the first major villains of the X-Men, a group of mutant outcasts called the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. They needed the group to feel populated, dangerous not just in its center, but at its margins. Kirby designed a woman with red clothing and unsettling energy. Lee tried out names, none of them stuck. Eventually, they landed on Scarlet Witch, and in March of 1964, in the 4th issue of the X-Men, a character who would reshape Marvel Comics for the next 6 decades made her first appearance alongside her twin brother Pietro, who would become Quicksilver. She was not introduced as a hero. She was not introduced as a tragic figure. She was introduced as a member of a group called the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, which is about as on-the-nose a villain organization as mid-century comic books could produce. But even in those first pages, something was slightly off about the framing. Wanda and Pietro were not there because they believed in conquest or cruelty. They were there because Magneto had saved them. A mob, frightened of their powers, frightened of what they were, had turned on them. Magneto arrived at the precise moment when the situation became fatal, and he offered them protection in exchange for loyalty. They took the deal. Think about what that actually means. Their first appearance in Marvel Comics is not a choice they make. It is the consequence of a world that had already decided they were dangerous. They did not choose villainy. They chose survival in a world that left them no other option. That distinction is subtle in the original 1964 issues, almost throwaway. But it will define Wanda Maximoff for the rest of her existence as a character. The specific origin of who Wanda and Pietro actually were, where they came from, who their parents were, what the source of their powers might be, was not addressed in those early issues. They were mutants, members of a persecuted minority with extraordinary abilities, and that was enough context for the story the early X-Men was telling. The deeper questions about Wanda's nature were left open, and Marvel would not begin seriously addressing them until many years later, with answers that would keep changing, keep being revised, keep generating more questions than they settled. What is verified from those first appearances is this. She had a power described loosely as a hex bolt, a kind of probability manipulation, a way of making bad things happen to specific people in the vicinity of her gesture. It was deliberately vague. The creative team wanted her to be unsettling rather than precise. Someone whose abilities did not fit neatly into the physics of superheroics, but instead introduced a quality of wrongness into situations, a sense that the rules were bending. That vagueness would eventually become one of the most powerful and most dangerous things about her. You cannot fully prepare for a power whose parameters you cannot define. She and Pietro stayed with the Brotherhood for roughly a year of publication time. Then, in Avengers number 16, published in 1965, one of the most impactful roster changes in the Avengers' history occurred. The founding members, Iron Man, Thor, Ant-Man, Wasp, and the Hulk, essentially all stepped back. Captain America, who had been unfrozen and brought back into the team in earlier issues, recruited 3 former villains to fill the gap: Hawkeye, who had clashed with Iron Man, Quicksilver, and Wanda. The press and the other heroes in the Marvel Universe called them Cap's Kooky Quartet, and the nickname carries a note of mockery that was probably intentional. 4 people who between them had 1 respected name and 3 questionable ones, trying to function as Earth's mightiest heroes. The transition from villain to hero was not instantaneous in emotional terms. Wanda and Pietro spent years in the Avengers carrying the quiet weight of what they had done while working for Magneto. But the transition happened, and it was genuine. Not because someone forced them toward it. Not because the story required a redemption arc. Because the core truth about both of them, which was visible even in their debut issue, was that they were never invested in destruction. They wanted safety. They wanted to exist without persecution. And the Avengers offered a version of that. There is no part of Wanda's early history more layered with retrospective weight than the question of who her father actually is. For the first 15 years of her existence as a character, the answer was simply unknown. Her origin was vague enough that the question did not press urgently on any particular story. Then in 1979, Avengers number 185 provided the answer. Wanda and Pietro were the biological children of Magneto. Their mother, a woman named Magda, had fled from Magneto after witnessing his powers turn on a mob in an act of terrifying violence. Pregnant and alone, she sought refuge at a place called Wanda Mountain, a location in the Marvel Universe with significant mystical history, home to the High Evolutionary, a scientist god who had dedicated his existence to accelerating human evolution through technology. It was on Wanda Mountain that Magda gave birth to twins, and it was from Wanda Mountain that she fled immediately afterward, disappearing into the world rather than raise children anywhere near the man she feared. This backstory remained the official account for approximately 30 years. It gave Wanda and Pietro a specific tragedy at their origin. Born to a man who became one of the most feared and powerful mutants alive, raised without knowing their father, shaped by violence and loss before they were old enough to remember it. It also gave Magneto a complicated emotional relationship with 2 of his long-standing adversaries, layering his confrontations with the Avengers and the X-Men with a grief that neither side fully understood. Then, around 2014 and 2015, Marvel reversed it. The timing was not coincidental. Fox Studios held the film rights to Mutants and the X-Men, which meant the MCU could not use Wanda and Pietro as mutants in their films. The solution required changing their comics' origin as well, at least functionally, to allow the films to establish their powers through a different mechanism. In the comics, the High Evolutionary, the scientist at Wanda Mountain, was retroactively revealed to have performed genetic experiments on the twins as infants, altering them and giving them abilities that were not the result of an X gene. The implication was that Django and Mariah Maximoff, the Romani family who had raised the twins and who Wanda and Pietro had believed to be their parents, were in fact their real biological parents. The X gene was removed from the equation. Further reading into this retcon produced an even more elaborate rewrite. Wanda's true birth mother was revealed to be a woman named Natalia Maximoff, a Romani sorceress who held the title of Scarlet Witch before Wanda, and who was Django Maximoff's previously unmentioned sister. Natalia died after giving birth to the twins. Django raised them as his own children. The legacy of the Scarlet Witch title, it turned out, predated Wanda. It was a mantle passed through a lineage of women with extraordinary magical ability, and Wanda was not the origin of that power. She was its latest inheritor. The reception to this retcon among comics readers was, to put it charitably, mixed. Magneto and Wanda had one of the most interesting parent-child dynamics in Marvel Comics, fraught with guilt, denial, projection, and the particular pain of a relationship that neither person knew how to want, but that both of them were incapable of simply discarding. Removing that relationship removed something that had given weight to dozens of stories. My honest take is that the retcon has never quite settled. It reads like a corporate patch rather than a creative choice, and some readers and critics have openly argued for restoring Magneto's paternity and treating the retcon as what it was: a business decision made to align comics with film rights, not a creative improvement. What the retcon did clarify, however, and this matters enormously for understanding Wanda's powers, is the connection to Wundagore Mountain. Whether or not Magneto is her father, she was born on that mountain. And Wundagore Mountain is not simply a notable location. In Marvel lore, the mountain is described as the place where the elder god Chthon was imprisoned long before human civilization existed. Chthon, among the oldest and most malevolent entities in the Marvel Universe, was bound within the stone of Wundagore and left there. And when Wanda was born on that mountain, Chthon marked her. He infused her with a portion of his power before she drew her first breath. The chaos magic that defines the Scarlet Witch is not merely a mutation. It is not merely a family inheritance. It is the power of an imprisoned god, channeled through a woman who never asked for it, and who spent most of her life not fully understanding what it was she carried. This is not a small thing. A child is born on a mountain. She does not choose what lives in the mountain. She does not know what was waiting there before her first breath. And for the rest of her life, the question of whether she is in control of her power, or whether her power is on some level using her, that question never fully resolves. There is a scene in the Second Vision and the Scarlet Witch limited series, the 12-issue run from 1985 to 1986, that is almost impossible to describe without the language feeling insufficient to the moment. Wanda and Vision are living in a house in the suburbs of New Jersey. They have a garden. Vision drives to work. Wanda waves from the porch. It looks, on the surface, like a deliberate joke. The most overtly domestic possible setting for two Avengers. The android who processes human emotion through sophisticated algorithms, and the Chaos Witch who could unmake probability itself. But the series, written by Steve Englehart with art by Richard Howell, is not playing the domesticity for laughs. It is playing it straight. And in doing so, it produces something much stranger and more affecting than satire. Wanda and Vision were married in 1975, in Giant Size Avengers number 4. The road to that marriage was the organic development of a relationship that had been building through years of Avengers issues. Two people who did not fit easily into the world around them, finding something in each other that made the world slightly more navigable. Vision was, by design, an entity that experienced emotion intellectually rather than intuitively. He understood what love was. He did not experience it in the way a human body generates and metabolizes feeling. And yet the thing he felt for Wanda was real enough that the difference between his version of love and the human version of love ceased to matter in any practical sense. What Wanda felt for Vision is harder to categorize, which is interesting because Wanda is the human one. She is the person who is supposed to feel things in the normal way. And yet the quality of her attachment to Vision, the specific character of what she needed from him and what she gave back, had always been unusual. Vision was steady, consistent. He did not panic, did not project, did not introduce the particular chaos of human emotional volatility into their shared life. For someone whose inner world was already chaotic enough, whose power was literally the ability to introduce chaos into external reality, the steadiness of Vision was not just appealing, it was necessary. They could not have children by any biological mechanism. Vision was a synthezoid, an artificial being with no capacity to reproduce, and Wanda was, of course, perfectly aware of this. But the writers of that second Vision and the Scarlet Witch miniseries wanted to explore what happened when Wanda's power encountered an impossibility and decided the impossibility was optional. She wanted children. She had chaos magic. Chaos magic operates fundamentally by making things happen that should not be able to happen. And so, in a move that blends the miraculous with the horrifying, Wanda used her power to become pregnant. The twins she carried and then delivered were named Billy and Tommy. They were real. Real enough to hold, to nurse, to watch grow. They were loved, and they were present, and the life in that suburban house felt, for a brief window, complete in the way Wanda had always needed it to be. And then the dark truth arrived. The villain Master Pandemonium, a figure with a demonic connection Wanda and Vision had encountered previously, revealed what Wanda had not known when she reached into the chaos to create life. She had not created something new. She had found something that already existed, two fragments of a soul that had been scattered long ago, belonging to the demon Mephisto. Mephisto is Marvel's devil-adjacent entity, the closest analog in the comics universe to the traditional conception of a demonic tempter. His soul had been shattered, and those fragments had been floating in the ether, and Wanda's chaos magic had reached out and pulled them in, formed them into children, without knowing what she had hold of. Master Pandemonium served as a vessel for Mephisto, and through him, Mephisto reclaimed what was his. The children were taken, not killed exactly, absorbed, reintegrated into the demonic entity from which their essence had always come. It happened in the pages of that second miniseries, quickly enough to feel like the ground opening without warning, which is precisely how these things feel. Wanda's response to losing the children was the kind of grief that does not resolve. It keeps going, it circles back, it makes no accommodation for the passage of time. Billy and Tommy had been real, had existed as fully as anyone who exists, regardless of the metaphysical substance of their creation, and then they were gone. And Wanda had no framework for that specific kind of loss. She had experienced persecution, displacement, violence, the terror of her powers being beyond her control. She had not experienced this. The specific grief of a mother who loses children who, according to the laws of reality, should never have existed in the first place. Her mentor in magic, Agatha Harkness, an ancient witch who had been teaching Wanda to understand and control the full scope of her abilities, made a decision. It was presented at the time and framed in retrospect as a mercy. Agatha suppressed Wanda's memories of Billy and Tommy. She did not explain why she had done this, or how, or what it would mean. She simply removed the memory of what had been lost, under the reasoning that a grief this specific, this irresolvable, would destroy Wanda if she had to carry it consciously. That is not a small thing. A woman loses her children. Her mentor decides the loss is too much for her to know about. The memory is taken. The intention was compassion. What it actually created was a bomb with no visible fuse. Wanda went on. She continued as an avenger. She continued loving Vision. She continued doing the work of a hero in a world that still had no particular interest in making room for her. The grief that Agatha had taken from her did not disappear. Grief does not disappear when you remove the memory of what caused it. It stays. It redistributes. It shows up as an edge of sadness that she could not account for, as a longing for something she could not name, as a specific kind of ache that visited her at particular moments without explanation. She did not know what she was grieving. She just knew she was still grieving. There is a version of Vision that walked back into the Avengers in 1989 and was the same in every measurable way, except for the one thing that mattered. The arc known as Vision Quest, written and drawn by John Byrne across West Coast Avengers issues 42 through 45 in early 1989, is one of the darkest things that Marvel Comics published in that era, and it did not present itself as dark. It presented itself as a consequence, a logical extension of a tension that had been building in the broader Marvel universe for years. How do you deal with an android who is also a superhero, and who is, by definition, capable of things that no purely human being could ever do? Vision was captured by a consortium of government agencies. The decision was made to dismantle him, not to destroy him precisely, but to take him apart, to examine what he was, to remove the capacity for certain forms of independent action that his level of ability represented. And during this process, his body was rendered chalk white. The synthetic skin that had given him his familiar red hue and vivid coloring was stripped away. More critically, his brain patterns, the record of his experiences, his emotional history, the software that constituted his inner life, were wiped. When Wonder Man was approached to donate his brain patterns again for Vision's restoration, having been the source of Vision's original imprint, the human consciousness whose structure became the template for Vision's synthetic mind, Wonder Man refused. He had recently developed deep feelings for Wanda and could not bring himself to essentially recreate Vision as a rival. His refusal is one of the less flattering moments in a character who is generally presented as heroic, and the story does not entirely excuse it. My reading is that Byrne is quietly indicting the whole Avenger apparatus in that panel, not just Wonder Man. When the person you love is taken apart by the government and your teammates cannot even agree on how to put him back together, the failure is collective. Vision came back. His memories were restored through a different method, but the feelings were gone. The emotional architecture, the specific quality of his experience that had made him who he was, the thing that had generated his love for Wanda over years of shared experience, had been erased and could not be perfectly reconstructed from memories alone. He remembered everything. He felt nothing. He was the same being the way a photocopy of a letter is the same letter. Technically accurate, functionally present, entirely unable to produce the warmth of the original. What Wanda was left with was a husband who could recall every moment of their relationship, but who could not access the experience of having lived it. He was not cold to her. He was not cruel. He was simply empty in the specific space where their love had existed. He could tell you what their marriage was. He could not feel what it meant. The marriage did not survive this, not in any real sense, though the formal dissolution took much longer. What Wanda was left with was the loss of something she still had. Vision was present. Vision was alive. Vision was technically still her husband, and the thing she had actually loved, the quality of his inner life, the specific warmth of his attention, was gone. She had lost a husband who was still standing in front of her. There is a moment in Avengers Disassembled, the 2004 story arc written by Brian Michael Bendis, that is the most instructive single beat in the entire Wanda Maximoff narrative. Not because of what happens in it, but because of how small the thing is that triggers what happens. The Avengers are gathered, normal heroes in an abnormal situation, the kind of scene that plays out hundreds of times across decades of Avengers issues. And the Wasp, Janet Van Dyne, makes an offhand remark, a casual comment about parenthood, the kind of thing people say without thinking about what it costs the person hearing it. She is not being cruel. She does not know what she is stepping on. Nobody in the room knows, because Agatha Harkness removed the information from Wanda's memory years ago with the precise intention of preventing this kind of accidental wound. The comment lands anyway, and in whatever deep architecture of Wanda's consciousness Agatha's magic had buried the memory of Billy and Tommy, something fractured. The suppression held for years. It held through grief and loss and the slow hollowing of her marriage. And then one sentence, spoken without any awareness of its weight, broke it open. What followed is one of the most disturbing sequences in Avengers history. Not because it is violent, though it is, severely, but because of what it reveals about the accumulated pressure of decades of unprocessed loss. She-Hulk, under the influence of Wanda's chaos magic, tore Vision apart. Not metaphorically. Vision, her Vision, the being she had loved and married and lost and never fully let go of, was physically dismantled by someone who was being weaponized by Wanda's unconscious mind. Vision, before he was killed, crashed a Quinjet into Avengers Mansion. Wanda conjured a Kree invasion force. The Avengers were under assault from every direction simultaneously, and the source of the attack was their own teammate, operating not from malice, but from a mind that had finally cracked open under a weight that had been building for years. Hawkeye, Clint Barton, died in this arc. He sacrificed himself when a Kree warship threatened the others. In a final act that Bendis presents almost in passing, the arc does not linger on individual casualties. It moves with the relentlessness of a genuine emergency. Scott Lang, the second Ant-Man, was also killed. These are real losses, real consequences, things that did not immediately reverse when the crisis ended. Doctor Strange traced the magical source to Wanda. The Avengers went to Genosha, the mutant homeland Magneto had once ruled, to confront her, and what they found was not a villain in control of her own actions. What they found was Wanda in the aftermath, the chaos bleeding out of her, the full weight of what she had done settling over her. The Avengers did not know what to do with this. The situation did not map onto any framework they had for dealing with enemies. This was not Magneto. This was not Doom. This was a teammate who had suffered an unimaginable breakdown and, in the process, had killed people who mattered to them. The question of what to do with Wanda, whether to treat her as a patient, as a criminal, as a danger requiring elimination, was live and unanswered. Before that question could be resolved, Magneto arrived. He took Wanda and carried her away, beyond the reach of any decision the Avengers might make about her fate. There is something worth sitting with in that moment. Magneto, whether or not he is her biological father, the man who has been coded as her parent for the bulk of her comics history, arrives at the precise moment when the people Wanda loves most are debating whether to execute her, and he removes her from the situation by force. The Avengers cannot pursue him without triggering a fight they are not equipped for. So Wanda went with her father, or the man the story treats as her father, because there was no one else to go with, and the consequences of what she had done, the deaths, the dismantling of the Avengers as they had existed for decades, were left sitting in the rubble of the mansion. That is not the behavior of a villain who got what they wanted. That is the behavior of someone who was in so much pain for so long that when the break finally came, the only direction the pain could go was outward. Agatha Harkness tried to spare Wanda by hiding the memory of her children. What she actually created was a pressure vessel that spent years accumulating force before exploding. The events of Avengers Disassembled led directly to House of M. The timeline is tight. The Avengers were disbanded in the aftermath of the attack. The wider superhero community was left with the same unanswered question. What do you do about Wanda Maximoff? A formal gathering of Avengers and X-Men was called to address the situation. The conversation was not productive. There was a faction that argued Wanda was too dangerous to remain alive. There was a faction that argued execution was not a just response to mental illness. The deliberations went nowhere. Pietro Maximoff watched these deliberations. He watched the people his sister had trusted, the colleagues she had fought alongside for years, weighing whether to kill her, and he could not bear it. His entire life, Pietro had been the protector, the faster twin, the one who put himself between danger and everyone he cared about. Watching Wanda's death be debated as a reasonable policy option was not something he was capable of enduring passively. So he went to Wanda, who was in a dissociated state, fragmented and not fully present, and he told her something. He described the conversation happening about her, and then he suggested a solution. He knew her power could reshape reality. He knew, because he had grown up alongside her, that the one thing Wanda had wanted for most of her life was a world where they were safe, where being different, being feared, being the kind of person a mob wants to destroy, did not mean constant danger. He suggested she give everyone what they secretly wanted, build a world where all of that became possible. Wanda used the words, "No more." The world went white. When reality reassembled itself, it was unrecognizable in its structure, but coherent in its dream logic. Mutants were the majority population. Magneto, the man who had spent decades fighting for mutant supremacy, sat at the center of a global mutant dynasty called the House of M. Humans were the marginalized minority. It was a world shaped by wish fulfillment. Every hero got the version of their life they most secretly wanted, and the architecture of the whole was designed to keep those wishes satisfying enough that no one would think to question the premise. House of M, written by Brian Michael Bendis with art by Olivier Coipel, ran 8 issues published in 2005. It is one of the most consequential stories in modern Marvel Comics history, not because of anything that happens within the altered reality, which is mostly a delivery mechanism for the central act, but because of what happens when the altered reality ends. A young woman named Layla Miller discovered she could awaken people to the truth of what the world actually was. She worked with the heroes. They began to remember, and when enough of them had remembered, when the dream became too fragile to sustain, Wanda turned on Pietro. The manipulation he had performed, whatever his intentions, had created a world built on lies and built on Wanda's power being used without her full understanding of the consequences. Wanda's anger in that moment, when she saw what Pietro had done, what he had talked her into, what it had cost, was total. And when she spoke again, The words she chose were not a reshaping of reality into something kinder. They were its undoing. No more mutants. 3 words. A sentence without a subject, technically, just the object and the negation. In that instant, mutant kind was functionally gutted. The depowering swept across the vast majority of the mutant population worldwide, leaving only a small remnant with their abilities intact. The mutant population went from millions to a small confirmed handful. The X gene itself was not merely suppressed in those who already had it. It was suppressed in the human genome, meaning no new mutants would be born. The species was being ended from within, by one of its own members, in an act of grief-driven devastation that no villain in Marvel history had ever come close to matching. There is no way to state this with sufficient emphasis. Wanda Maximoff, with 3 words, nearly wiped out an entire species. Not through violence, but through the withdrawal of a biological capacity. The thing she removed was so fundamental that the loss could not be contested or appealed. You cannot argue with someone who has removed the thing that made you what you are. The aftermath of House of M is known in Marvel Comics as the Decimation, or M-Day. The name decimation is technically inaccurate. To decimate, etymologically, means to reduce by 1/10, and what happened on M-Day was far more comprehensive than that. But the word was chosen for its emotional register, not its mathematical precision, and in that sense it fits. The sheer scale of what occurred. Think about it. From millions of mutants to a small fraction of that number. The remaining mutants living under government protection at the Xavier Institute became one of the most closely watched populations in the world. Their symbolic weight was almost impossible to process. A species reduced to a count smaller than a large apartment building's occupant list. The mutants who retained their powers did so arbitrarily. There was no pattern. There was no mercy in the selection. Some of the most prominent and powerful mutants in the world were depowered. Others were not, and the ones who were depowered did not simply lose their abilities. They lost the physical structures those abilities had required, which in many cases meant serious medical complications. In some cases meant death. A mutant whose body had been built around wings lost the wings. The adjustments involved were physiological, not merely functional. The X gene suppression was the detail that made M-Day different from any previous catastrophe in mutant history. This was not an attack that could be recovered from. There was no cure to develop, no antidote to administer. Wanda had not taken a thing from them. She had removed the capacity for the thing ever to come back. New mutants would not be born. The species had a death date. The response from the broader Marvel community to this event is significant. The X-Men, for obvious reasons, were devastated. The Avengers, who had been the ones to call the gathering that led to Pietro's intervention, carried a specific guilt about their role in the chain of events. If they had not convened the discussion about executing Wanda, Pietro would not have felt the urgency that drove him to push her toward reshaping reality. None of that guilt was simple or clean, because none of the causation was simple or clean. The decision that led to M-Day was made by Pietro, yes, but the conditions that made that decision feel necessary were created by an entire community of heroes who failed to find a better answer than execution. Wanda herself was gone. After House of M, she simply ceased to be present in the Marvel Universe for years. No one knew where she was. No one went looking for her with any urgency. She was the most powerful being in the world, and the source of one of the greatest catastrophes in superhero history. And the resolution, after everything, was that she disappeared. That disappearance lasted for years. The years between House of M and Children's Crusade are almost a story unto themselves. Not because of what Wanda was doing, but because of what the Marvel Universe was doing without her. The X-Men, in the immediate aftermath of M-Day, were in a position that would have been unimaginable before 3 words were spoken. A species that had been growing, expanding, persecuted but surviving, suddenly reduced to a count that could fit in a small building. The government placed the remaining mutants under observation at the Xavier Institute, designating them as a protected population and simultaneously a surveilled one. The tension of that arrangement, sanctuary that is indistinguishable from containment, became the backdrop for years of X-Men storytelling. Stories about who was and was not among the survivors. Stories about mutants who had lost their powers and were trying to determine who they were without them. Stories about the psychological experience of surviving something that killed everyone around you. Through all of this, Wanda was absent. The woman responsible for the most catastrophic single act in mutant history was simply not there. No trial, no accountability process, no reckoning of any formal kind. The X-Men had opinions about this. Cyclops, who emerged in the post-House of M period as a harder, more tactically ruthless leader, made it clear that whatever mercy the Avengers might extend to Wanda was not mercy he could offer. The tension between the Avengers' protective instinct toward a former teammate and the X-Men's righteous fury at a woman who had effectively committed genocide against their species became one of the defining fault lines of Marvel Comics in the mid to late 2000s. The absence of a body, the lack of a grave, a definitive end, a confirmed fate, meant that Wanda's presence in the Marvel Universe during those years was the presence of a wound that refused to close. She was not there, and she was everywhere. Every story about the decimation's consequences had her at its center by her absence. Every mutant who woke up in a human body and tried to remember how to be a person without the thing that had defined them was a consequence of what Wanda had done. Every child born in the years after M-Day, who might have been a mutant in any previous reality, was instead born ordinary, the X gene suppressed before it could emerge. The X gene suppression was, arguably, the most lasting consequence of House of M. The deaths, the depowerments, the psychological damage, these were immediate and severe. But the suppression of new mutant births was the thing that threatened species-level extinction in the most fundamental sense. Not the killing of what existed, the prevention of what was coming. You could mourn the mutants who had been depowered. You could not mourn the mutants who were never born, because the possibility of them had been removed. This is the scale of what Wanda carried through her years of exile, and she did not know she was carrying it. Her memories were suppressed. She was living as an ordinary person with no access to what she had done or to the weight of its consequences. Somewhere in the Marvel Universe, mutant kind was rebuilding itself from a tiny remnant, and the woman responsible was having coffee in a small town and planning her wedding. There is a profound cruelty in that, but it is not the cruelty of intention. Agatha's suppression was meant to be merciful, and in a narrow technical sense it was. Wanda was spared the knowledge of what she had done for several years, but the rest of the world did not have the option of being spared. The consequences were real, whether or not Wanda remembered causing them. Reality does not adjust its damage to fit the perpetrator's memory. The Young Avengers found her in Avengers, The Children's Crusade, a 9-issue limited series by Alan Heinberg and Jim Chung that ran from 2010 into 2012. The Young Avengers, a team formed partly from the children and successors of established heroes, included 2 members who were, in a very specific sense, Wanda's children. Wiccan, his real name William Kaplan, had magical abilities that bore an unmistakable resemblance to the Scarlet Witch's. Speed, Thomas Shepard, had super speed and white hair, the exact combination that characterized Uncle Pietro. The two of them were not biologically related in this incarnation. They had been raised in separate families, found each other through superheroics, and gradually pieced together a theory about what they actually were. Fans have theorized, and the story leans toward this reading, that they are the reincarnated souls of Billy and Tommy Maximoff, returned to the world in new bodies after Mephisto reabsorbed them decades earlier. The theory was addressed in Children's Crusade. Magneto, who believed it to be true, joined the Young Avengers in tracking Wanda down. She was living as an ordinary person, not just in hiding but with her memories erased, genuinely unaware of who she was, what she had done, what she was capable of. Her memories had been suppressed again. The woman the Young Avengers found was not the Scarlet Witch. She was a woman named Wanda who was engaged to a man in a small town and who had no access to the life she had lived before. The restoration of her memories was not a gentle process. It happened, and with it came the full weight of everything she had done. M-Day, Avengers disassembled, the lost children, the dismantled marriage, all of it returned at once. What the series also revealed, through its excavation of the timeline, is that Wanda's destruction of the mutant species was not purely voluntary. Her attempt, with Doctor Doom, to channel the life force, a cosmic entity of almost incomprehensible power, in order to resurrect Billy and Tommy, had gone wrong in a way that exceeded any containment she could provide. The rage of that cosmic power, channeled through someone who could not hold it cleanly, was part of what became the devastation of M-Day. She did not choose to hurt those people. She chose to try something impossible. And the consequences of choosing to try something impossible when you have unlimited power are not always within the range of what you anticipated. This does not absolve her. Nothing in the story presents it as absolution. But it complicates the simple reading of Wanda as a woman who willfully destroyed a species because she was angry. The truth is messier and sadder and more human. She was trying to get her children back. She reached for something she could not contain, and the catastrophe that resulted was the overflow of grief and power combining at a scale that should not have been possible. At the end of Children's Crusade, Wanda declared something that is, in its quiet way, one of the most significant statements she has ever made. She said she intended to define herself on her own terms from that point forward. Not as Magneto's daughter, not as Pietro's twin, not as Vision's wife, as Wanda Maximoff, who was all of those things and more than all of those things, and who had the right to determine what that meant going forward. It is a good statement. It is the kind of statement that marks a genuine turning point. Whether the Marvel Universe actually allowed her to make good on it is a more complicated question, and if I am honest, my answer is only sort of. There is a moment in X-Men, The Trial of Magneto, the 2021 5-issue series by Leah Williams and Lucas Werneck, that initially appears to be about whether Magneto murdered Wanda at the Hellfire Gala. Her body is found. The community of mutants on Krakoa, already in a complicated relationship with Wanda, given the history of M-Day, moves quickly toward accusation. Magneto is the obvious suspect, but the story is doing something more interesting than a murder mystery. It is doing something with the concept of sacrifice that most superhero narratives do not have the patience for. Wanda had not been murdered. As the series reveals, she willingly gave her life in order to create a mystical space that would let the Krakoan resurrection protocols reach mutants who had died before Cerebro's backup systems existed. Without that reach, the mutants who had died on M-Day and before could not be brought back. Wanda's sacrifice, performed in secret, was an attempt to repair some portion of the damage she had caused. She gave her life not as atonement theater, but as a practical act. She found the one thing only she could do that addressed the scale of what she had taken. She was resurrected inside the series because this is superhero comics, and death in superhero comics is rarely the final word, but what mattered was the act itself, not its permanence. The Krakoan community, a community that had spent years harboring understandable fury at her, was forced to reckon with what she had actually done. The mutants took a vote and gave her a title, Redeemer. That is the same woman who spoke 3 words and depowered a species. The symmetry is not accidental. It is the architecture of a character who has spent her entire existence generating consequences at a scale that seems incompatible with the single human being at the center of it all. There is a version of Wanda Maximoff who carries a specific history that the Marvel Cinematic Universe chose not to tell. In the comics, Wanda is canonically of Romani descent. Through her true birth mother, Natalia Maximoff, the sorceress who was the original Scarlet Witch and who died giving birth to the twins, Wanda's heritage is specific and documented. The Romani identity is not incidental to her early story. Her and Pietro's persecution, the mob that drove them to Magneto, the vulnerability that made their situation feel like a trap with only one exit. These things are rooted in the particular violence that Romani people have historically faced across Europe. The hatred directed at them in the early comics is not generalized anti-mutant sentiment. It is the specific shape of anti-Romani racism, translated into a superhero context that amplifies the intensity without fully disguising the real-world source. When the MCU was building Wanda Maximoff for the screen, they placed her in Sokovia, a fictional Eastern European country with no specific cultural identity beyond politically unstable and caught between larger powers. Elizabeth Olsen, a white actress with no Romani heritage, was cast in the role. The specific Romani identity that gives the comics version of Wanda her historical grounding was replaced with a vague Eastern European backdrop that could serve as a generic source of trauma without requiring any particular cultural specificity. This has been documented as a criticism by Romani community members, cultural scholars, and journalists. The erasure is not accidental. It is the result of a production process that treats cultural specificity as optional when it belongs to a minority community that does not have significant power in Hollywood to advocate for its own representation. Olsen has spoken about wanting to honor the character's heritage. She also, in a widely noted and criticized comment, used a term for Romani people that is considered a slur by many in the community. The comment deployed the word in precisely the way casual prejudice deploys such terms, not with malice, but with the comfortable unawareness of someone for whom the word's history is not personal. The reason to state this plainly, in a video primarily about Wanda's fictional tragedy, is that it reframes something. The comics Wanda is a Romani woman who fled persecution, who found protection in a monsters organization, who turned toward heroism and then paid for it at every subsequent stage. The MCU Wanda is a generic Eastern European trauma survivor whose specific identity has been smoothed away into something more easily legible to a mainstream global audience. These are not the same character in all the ways that matter. The tragedy is real in both versions. But the specific texture of what it means to be the Scarlet Witch, the weight of a heritage that includes centuries of persecution attached to the particular power she carries, is something the MCU version never fully had. This is not a reason to dismiss the MCU version. Olsen built something real and affecting across a decade of performances, and I think her work carries the character honestly within the boundaries the script gave her. But it is a reason to understand what the comics version is doing that the MCU version cannot, and to give the original its full due. The Scarlet Witch ongoing series launched in January of 2023, written by Steve Orlando with art by Sarah Pichelli, and it represents the fullest expression of who Wanda Maximoff is after everything the comics have put her through. The premise is simple enough to describe in one sentence. A mysterious door appears only to those who are in the greatest need of help, and inside is Wanda, ready to offer it. In practice, what this means is that the series has positioned Wanda not as an Avenger who happens to be Romani and who happens to have staggering magical power, but as something older and more specific. A healer, a sanctuary, a woman who has survived enough catastrophe that her presence is itself a form of witness for people navigating their own. The series features Quicksilver, Polaris, Vision, and, in an unusual choice that signals the increasing permeability between MCU and comics aesthetics, a character named Darcy Lewis, who appeared in WandaVision as a researcher studying the Hex from outside. Her inclusion is the kind of move that acknowledges a shared audience without fully surrendering either universe's logic. And it works, because Orlando is not using the MCU echoes to replace the comic's own depth. He is letting them coexist. What the Orlando series captures, that earlier Wanda stories have sometimes missed, is the specific quality of someone who has been the most powerful person in the room and the most broken person in the room, and who has learned, slowly, at great cost, that those two things do not have to be synonymous. The Wanda of 2023 is not healed. She is not past what happened. She is working, and she is helping, and she has found a form for her power that is oriented toward repair rather than toward the magnitude of what she could destroy if she allowed it to go that direction. The shop that only the desperate can find is a perfect metaphor for what Wanda has become by this point in her story. She is not advertising. She is not performing heroism for an audience. She is not trying to rehabilitate her reputation by being visibly good in front of witnesses. She is just there when people need her, and the door only appears to those who can see it, which means the people who find her are already the people who need what she specifically has to offer. It is, in its quiet way, the most hopeful version of Wanda that comics have produced. Not because it wraps her tragedy neatly, it does not, but because it shows a person who has integrated the magnitude of what she has experienced and found, in that integration, a new kind of purpose. She is not okay, but she is useful. And for Wanda Maximoff, across 60 years of story, being useful without being destructive is harder than anything else she has ever done. Now the story moves. It does not go backward into comics history again. It goes to the MCU, to Elizabeth Olsen, to Sokovia, to a specific year, a specific apartment, a specific missile. Wanda Maximoff was born in 1989 in Sokovia, a small fictional Eastern European country positioned by the MCU as a place defined by its position between larger powers. Historically unstable, economically precarious, politically peripheral, the name Sokovia does not appear on any real map. The MCU put Wanda there instead of placing her in the specific Romani community that her comics counterpart comes from, which is a deliberate choice that carries real meaning and which we have already sat with. Her parents were named Oleg and Irina Maximoff. She had a twin brother, Pietro. They lived in an apartment block that, when Wanda and Pietro were 10 years old, was struck by a Stark Industries shell. The first shell killed their parents. Wanda and Pietro, buried in rubble, survived. Then they saw the second one. It was right there, close enough to read the name on the side. Stark Industries. The weapon that had just killed their parents had landed next to them intact, and it had not detonated. They stayed there for 2 days. 2 days in the rubble, with the unexploded ordnance and the silence and the understanding of what was written on the side of the thing that had taken their family. This is presented in WandaVision, in the flashback episode previously on, the 8th episode of the series, which aired February 26, 2021. And there is a detail in that flashback that the show reveals with enough care that it needs to be stated plainly. The second Stark shell did not fail to go off because of a manufacturing defect or a lucky malfunction. Fans have read the sequence as Wanda unconsciously casting a probability hex and turning it into a dud, and the show quietly frames it that way too. Wanda saved her own life before she knew she had powers. She saved Pietro's life before either of them knew what she could do, and they spent 2 days next to that shell, in terror, not knowing that the reason they survived was already inside her. Think about what that does to a child. The thing that makes you different, the thing that eventually makes you a target and an experiment and a weapon, was there from the beginning. It was there at the worst moment, and it did the most important thing it would ever do, and she had no idea. She thought she survived because the shell was a dud. She survived because she is the Scarlet Witch, and the Scarlet Witch's power was alive in her at that age and would not let the weapon her enemy built take her out of the world. The years that followed were shaped by that day, by the name on the side. Wanda and Pietro grew up carrying an anger that was specific and directed. Not generalized anti-American sentiment, but a grief that had a brand name attached to it. Tony Stark built the thing that killed their parents. The anger was legitimate, and it produced, eventually, a choice. When Hydra came to Sokovia offering the opportunity to become powerful enough to do something about the source of that anger, Wanda and Pietro volunteered. Baron Strucker, the Hydra operative who ran the program, had acquired Loki's scepter, which, though no one fully understood this at the time, contained the Mind Stone. He used the stone's energy in experiments on volunteers, most of whom died. Wanda and Pietro survived. More than that, they were changed. Pietro's speed was released into him. Wanda's probability manipulation, already inherent, was amplified and diversified into a wider spectrum of mental and reality-bending abilities. Telekinesis, telepathy, the capacity to craft illusions, and the deeper power that the Darkhold would later identify as chaos magic. The Mind Stone did not give Wanda her powers. The WandaVision flashback makes this clear in a visual moment that is easy to miss. When young Wanda looks into the stone, the form of the Scarlet Witch she will eventually become reaches back toward her from within it. The stone recognized what was already there. It amplified and awakened. The power was always hers. Avengers: Age of Ultron opened in 2015 and introduced Wanda and Pietro to the MCU in full for the first time, following their brief appearance in the post-credit scene of Captain America: The Winter Soldier the previous year. They began the film working with Ultron, not because they cared about artificial intelligence or world domination, but because Ultron promised them something they actually wanted: a move against Tony Stark, the man whose name was on the shell. When they discovered that Ultron's plan was not focused rage but extinction, the annihilation of humanity as a species, they defected. The distinction mattered to them. They wanted the man who had hurt them to feel what they had felt. They did not want every human being on Earth to die. That is a coherent moral line for people raised on the specific grievance of parental murder. Pietro died during the Battle of Sokovia. Ultron, controlling a fighter jet, opened fire on Hawkeye and a child who were trying to evacuate. Pietro used his speed to get there first. He took the bullets. His last words, directed at Hawkeye, whom he had been needling throughout the film, were, "You didn't see that coming." It is a joke. His last words are a joke. Wanda felt it, not metaphorically. She was on the other side of the city, engaged in her own battle, and she felt Pietro's death like a signal cutting out. She stopped what she was doing. She looked at nothing visible, and then she let the feeling move through her and become something she could use, and she leveled the robots around her without touching them. The film does not add music to tell you how to feel about this. It just holds on her face for a second, and then she does the thing she does, and then the scene moves on. The restraint of that choice is the right choice. Any score added on top of it would have been an insult to the weight of the moment. Pietro was gone, Wanda continued. She became an Avenger, which meant she had now done two impossible things: survived the experiment that killed most of its subjects, and kept going after her twin was murdered in front of her, at the age she had been when their parents were killed. Grief, in Wanda's life, is not something you work through and arrive at the other side of. It is the atmosphere. You breathe it in and you keep moving because the only alternative is stopping, and stopping in the middle of a fight gets people killed. Captain America: Civil War arrived in 2016, and with it, one of the most consequential single mistakes of Wanda's MCU tenure. The Lagos Incident, the full name of the event that precipitates the Sokovia Accords storyline. Wanda was working with Captain America and the other Avengers to stop Crossbones, a former Hydra operative, from stealing a biological weapon in a public market in Lagos, Nigeria. The confrontation went wrong. Crossbones activated a suicide vest, detonating it in the middle of a crowd. Wanda used her telekinesis to contain the explosion. This was the right instinct. In the half-second between the detonation and the containment, she did the only thing she could do. But in containing the explosion, she had to redirect the energy somewhere, and she redirected it upward, and upward was a building where 26 people died when the redirected force tore through the upper floors. 11 of them were Wakandan relief workers, which gave the incident the specific diplomatic dimensions that the Sokovia Accords storyline needed. This needs to be stated clearly. Wanda made a mistake. She did not cause the explosion. Crossbones caused the explosion. She intervened to minimize casualties, and her intervention itself caused casualties. That is not malice. It is the specific category of tragedy that occurs when someone with enormous power operates in an environment where the margin for error is narrower than human reaction time can accommodate. The Sokovia Accords, signed by 117 countries in the aftermath of Lagos, were at least partly framed around the question of what to do with Wanda Maximoff. Not only her. The Accords were a broader response to the pattern of collateral damage associated with superhero activity. But she was not a peripheral case study in the debate. She was near its center. She sided with Captain America. She ended up imprisoned after the airport battle in Germany, held at the Raft, an underwater supermax facility, along with other Avengers who had refused to sign the Accords. The image of her there, in a cell, with a device designed to suppress her powers fitted over her, is one that Civil War does not linger on. It passes through it and moves forward. But sit with it. She had just tried to save lives in Lagos. She had, for the first time, gotten something wrong in the process of trying to do the right thing. And the consequence was imprisonment. That is not a small thing either. The specific detail that most people do not fully register about Avengers, Infinity War, the 2018 film, is not the snap. It is the sequence that leads up to the snap, and specifically what Wanda was asked to do. She and Vision had been living in hiding in Edinburgh, Scotland. The relationship that had been developing quietly through the later events of Civil War had become something real and present. They had a life, or something approaching a life. The two of them, in a city that was not New York, not the Avengers compound, not any place connected to the network of obligations and consequences that had defined their existence for years. They were just two people having dinner. Then the Black Order arrived. Corvus Glaive and Proxima Midnight, serving Thanos, came for the Mind Stone in Vision's forehead. Vision survived the attack, badly damaged. He and Wanda made it to Wakanda, where the Avengers were gathering for a final stand. And in Wakanda, the question was put to Wanda directly. Could she destroy the Mind Stone? The stone was part of Vision's consciousness, part of the physical structure that his existence depended on. Destroying it would kill him. It would also potentially prevent Thanos from completing the Infinity Gauntlet, which was the only reason to do it. Vision asked her to do it. He asked her to kill him. She is the only being with a close enough connection to the Mind Stone, forged through the experiments that gave her powers, to actually destroy it. No one else can. The stone that made her what she is the same stone that would kill the person she loves if she unmakes it. The structure of the ask is almost unbearably precise in its cruelty. On the battlefield of Wakanda, while simultaneously using her full power to hold back Thanos, physically restraining him, alone, with enough force that he could not approach for a significant period of time, Wanda destroyed the Mind Stone. She held Thanos at bay, and she killed Vision with her own hands, and she did both of those things at the same time without looking away. Then Thanos used the Time Stone. He reversed the moment. Vision's death was undone in the most specific possible way, not erased from Wanda's memory, not made not to count, but literally reversed so that it happened again. So that she watched Vision die a second time, and then Thanos took the Mind Stone and left, and the snap followed, and Wanda was erased from the universe, along with half of all life. She killed him once. That was not enough. He was killed again right in front of her, and then she ceased to exist for 5 years. When she returned in Avengers Endgame, through the time heist reversal, through the work that the surviving Avengers had done in the 5 years of her absence, she returned to a world that had already processed a version of the grief she had not yet been able to start processing. The 5 years between the snap and the reversal had happened to everyone but her. She came back to a grief that was exactly as fresh as the moment she left. The confrontation with Thanos in the final battle is one of the few moments in the MCU where a character gets to say what they are feeling directly, without the awkwardness of narrative framing making it feel melodramatic. Thanos does not know who she is. He has done so much damage at such a scale that she is simply one more person in an endless list of people he has hurt, and he does not remember her specifically. She tells him, "You took everything from me." He responds that he does not know who she is. She says, "You will." What follows is as close as the MCU has come to depicting someone operating at the absolute limit of their power, driven entirely by grief. She nearly beats him. She overwhelms him to the degree that he calls an airstrike on his own army to stop her. Kevin Feige has been widely quoted describing Olsen's Wanda as the most powerful Avenger. The evidence for that claim is in that sequence. WandaVision premiered on January 15th of 2021 on Disney+. It was the first Marvel series released on the platform, the opening entry in MCU Phase 4, and it was unlike anything the franchise had done before. The series takes place 3 weeks after Avengers Endgame. Wanda drives to Westview, New Jersey. Vision had purchased a plot of land there before Infinity War, a small piece of property in a suburb, with a note attached saying he wanted them to grow old together there. Wanda arrives at an empty lot. There is no house. There is no Vision. There is just the land they were supposed to share and the grief of everything that was supposed to happen on it. What occurs next is not a rational decision. It is not a plan. Wanda does not think, "I will use chaos magic to reshape this town into a sitcom so I can live with a resurrection of my dead husband." Her grief simply exceeds the boundary of what reality can contain, and the chaos magic that has been building in her for years without a sufficient outlet flows outward, and Westview becomes the Hex. The Hex is a perfect circle of reality distortion, visible from outside as a shimmering wall of energy, visible from inside as a series of shifting television realities drawn from the American sitcoms Wanda watched as a child in Sokovia. Those shows were one of the rare sources of warmth in a country that was frequently violent and uncertain. American sitcoms, their clean resolutions, their studio audiences, their domestic order, were what Wanda reached for when she needed the world to feel safe. The Hex is not a rational construct. It is what the inside of her grief looks like when her power gives it form. The 9 episodes of WandaVision move through the decades. The first 2 episodes render Westview in the aesthetics and pacing of 50s and 60s television, drawing from Dick Van Dyke and Bewitched. Episode 3 shifts into the 70s, into the warm-toned domesticity of shows like The Brady Bunch. By the middle of the run, set in the Family Ties era of the 80s, the genre has shifted enough that tragedy can start to surface within the sitcom's structure. The 5th episode's title, On a Very Special Episode, is an explicit reference to the network television tradition of inserting serious issues into otherwise light series. The structure has been compared to the model of grief that names 5 stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance. The sitcom eras are not a cute formal device. They are the shape of Wanda's psychological interior. The 50s pastoral is denial. Everything is fine. The laugh track confirms it. The neighborhood is friendly and no one ever dies. The 60s quirky magic era is the same denial slightly extended. By the time she reaches the decade where grief starts to crack through the surface of the genre, she has bargained through several layers of unreality. What makes WandaVision work as a piece of storytelling, and why it received 23 Primetime Emmy nominations, one of the highest counts for any program that year, is that it trusts its audience to understand that the sitcom framing and the grief framework are not 2 separate things that exist in tension. They are the same thing. The sitcom is the grief. The laugh track is the sound of Wanda trying to hold together a reality that keeps threatening to fall apart. The children appear in episode 3, titled Now in Color, which aired January 22, 2021. Wanda becomes pregnant within the Hex, and the pregnancy advances impossibly fast. She is visibly showing within the episode, then in labor, then holding infants. The twins are named Billy and Tommy, after the children she does not consciously remember, but whose names and identities are encoded somewhere in the chaos magic that created the Hex. The subconscious insistence is the most devastating detail. She suppressed the memory of her lost sons, but the chaos magic remembered anyway. Billy and Tommy age at an accelerated rate within the Hex, an echo of the original comics' children, whose aging was also anomalous. Within a few episodes, they are children capable of conversation, of asking questions Wanda cannot fully answer, of noticing the things she needs them not to notice. Outside the Hex, SWORD, the Sentient Weapon Observation and Response Division, is attempting to understand and ultimately terminate what is happening in Westview. Director Hayward, the agency's leader, positions the Hex as a hostage situation and Wanda as the threat. Monica Rambeau, a field agent and the daughter of Carol Danvers's old friend Maria Rambeau, takes a more nuanced view. She has interacted with Wanda before, and she does not believe the threat framing. She breaches the Hex multiple times, each time being reshaped by the reality distortion, and in the process is transformed at a molecular level. The neighbor Agnes is revealed, in the 7th episode, Breaking the Fourth Wall, which aired February 19, 2021, to be Agatha Harkness. The Agatha reveal is one of the few genuinely shocking moments in a season full of controlled suspense, because it recontextualizes everything that came before it, rather than simply adding to the pile. Agnes has been hovering in the margins of every episode, slightly wrong, slightly too present, always available when something needed to be nudged. The explanation is not that she has been masterminding Wanda's breakdown. It is that she has been feeding on it, drawing from the chaos magic that the Hex generates, studying it, trying to understand how Wanda is doing something she has never been able to do herself. Agatha Harkness, in the MCU version, is an ancient witch who was nearly executed by her own coven for practicing magic beyond what the coven sanctioned. She is centuries old, she is extraordinarily powerful by normal witchcraft standards, and she has never been close to what Wanda can do. The Darkhold Prophecy, which Agatha reads to Wanda in the 8th episode, previously on, aired February 26, 2021, is the central statement of what the Scarlet Witch is supposed to be, according to the universe's darkest magical text. The Scarlet Witch is not born, she is forged. She has no coven, no need for incantation. Her power is greater than the Sorcerer Supreme's. It is her destiny to destroy the world. Forged, not born. That word matters. Birth implies origin, something that was always coming, a natural emergence. Forged implies process. Something that had to be made, through heat and pressure, through specific acts of suffering that shaped it into what it is. Wanda was not inevitable, she was produced. By Wundagore Mountain and the elder god sleeping in its stone, by a Stark shell in Sokovia, by a Hydra cell and a Mind Stone, by the death of her brother, by the slow grief of losing Vision before she lost him, by the loss of him twice in the same afternoon. Every specific thing that happened to her contributed to making the power available that would eventually make her dangerous enough to be described as a world ender. The show does not offer this as an excuse. It offers it as an explanation, which is different. An excuse removes responsibility. An explanation locates responsibility within a chain of causation, where Wanda is not the only link. She is the most powerful link, the one that produces the most visible destruction, but she is not the first link. There is a battle in the WandaVision finale, the 9th episode, the series finale, which aired March 5, 2021, that should not work as well as it does. On one side is the Vision that Wanda created from her own chaos magic. A man built from grief and love, with Vision's memories and, this time, the genuine warmth that the original had been stripped of when the government dismantled him. On the other is White Vision, the original Vision's physical body, reconstructed by Sword director Hayward, stripped of all personality and emotion, reprogrammed as a weapon. Two versions of the same being. One made of grief and magic, one made of machinery and government authorization. They could simply fight, but they do not. They talk. The Hex Vision asks White Vision a philosophical question. He cites the ship of Theseus. The ancient thought experiment about identity and continuity, about whether a thing that has had all its parts replaced is still the same thing. White Vision is the original physical body with the original components. Hex Vision is a new entity with the same memories and personality. Which one is Vision? The argument is brief and precise, and it resolves not with a winner but with a restoration. Hex Vision, using his chaos magic connection to the original's memory, reaches into what White Vision has been suppressing and brings it up to the surface. White Vision's full history, everything that happened before Hayward's program, surfaces. He processes it. He says, "I am Vision," and then he flies away. That is the most unexpectedly intellectual scene in the MCU. Two artificial beings settle a philosophical problem about identity and selfhood through a conversation. No punches needed. The punch would have been the wrong answer to the question the scene is asking. What White Vision is doing after flying away is not specified in WandaVision. Vision Quest, announced for Disney+, will presumably begin to address this. The White Vision who flew away is, in some real sense, the original Vision, the one whose history Hayward tried to suppress, now restored and searching for what he is, without the Hex, or the chaos magic, or the grief construct to define him. The finale's final act is the dissolution of the Hex. Wanda makes the choice to end it, because she has to, because the people of Westview are suffering inside it, because maintaining it requires her to sustain something at a cost that is unsustainable. She expands the Hex to free the Sword forces that had been transformed and frozen at the boundary, and then she slowly brings the walls in. The sitcom world collapses. The house reassembles itself into the empty lot she arrived at 3 weeks earlier. Vision, standing in it as it dissolves around them, takes her hands and asks what she is. She tells him he is the piece of the Mind Stone that lives in her. He is her grief and her love and her memory and her hope. He is the most human part of her. She says goodbye. Billy and Tommy, in their room, feel the world ending around them. Their last words to her, before they cease to exist with the hex that created them, are, "Mom, Mom, we are not afraid of you. We know you will set it right." Those words are not comforting. They are the opposite of comforting. They are two children, in the process of disappearing, telling their mother that they believe she is capable of doing something neither of them will be alive to see. The faith in those words is the most heartbreaking thing in the series, because it costs them nothing to offer it, and it costs her everything to receive it. Wanda flies away from Westview. She takes the Darkhold. The final post-credit scene shows her in a remote cabin, in astral form, studying the book while her physical body sits at a table. And in the quiet, she hears it, Billy and Tommy, calling for her from somewhere in the multiverse. The last sound of WandaVision is Wanda Maximoff learning that she said goodbye to her children, and it was not over. They are still out there. They are calling for her. And she is alone on a mountain with a book that tells her what she could become. The months between WandaVision and Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness are not shown on screen. We are given enough to understand their shape. Wanda found the Darkhold's description of dreamwalking, a technique that allows a sorcerer to possess their own alternate universe counterpart, riding along inside them, experiencing the life that a different version of themselves is living. And she used it to find universes where her sons existed. She rode along in those selves, watching through borrowed eyes as Billy and Tommy lived lives in worlds where their mother was not also a woman who had made them and then unmade them. She watched them sleep. She watched them at breakfast tables. She watched them in the ordinary moments that her version of motherhood never reached. The Darkhold, it should be stated plainly, corrupts. It corrupts the way that prolonged exposure to any extreme force corrupts. Gradually, imperceptibly at first, and then suddenly and completely. Every night she dreamwalked was a night the book's power ran a little deeper into her. Every morning she put the book down, she was a slightly different version of herself than the one who had picked it up. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, directed by Sam Raimi and written by Michael Waldron, opens in 2022 with Wanda already at the other end of that process. She is not the woman who said goodbye to Westview. She is what months of the Darkhold produce in someone who was already the most powerful magic user on Earth, someone for whom the only question left is how far she is willing to go. The answer, as the film demonstrates at increasing cost, is very far. America Chavez is a teenager with the unique ability to punch through the multiverse, creating portals between realities that she cannot control and that no one else in the universe possesses. The ability is biological, not mystical. She was born with it, cannot give it away, cannot be taught to use it reliably. The film's premise is that the only way to acquire it is to take it from her, and taking it from her would kill her. Wanda wants it. With that ability, she could travel to a specific universe where her sons are alive and present and waiting for a mother who would be her. She would not be dreamwalking anymore. She would not be riding along in someone else's experience. She would be there, actually their mother. What she does in pursuit of this goal is difficult to describe without the weight of the specific acts. She murders the Illuminati, the elite superhero council of Earth 838, which includes Reed Richards, a sorcerer supreme who is not Stephen Strange, Black Bolt, Captain Carter, and Professor X. She kills each of them. She is not conflicted about this. The Darkhold has removed the specific cognitive step where she factors in what these people are worth outside of their usefulness to her goal. That is the most honest thing the film offers about what the Darkhold does. It does not make Wanda evil. It makes her precise in the way that grief makes people precise. It removes the peripheral considerations, the sympathy for people who are not the people she is trying to get back, the concern for consequences that do not intersect with the single outcome she is driving toward. The Darkhold does not introduce cruelty. It removes everything that was moderating it. The breaking point is the moment when America transports Wanda to the universe where Billy and Tommy are alive. The boys see her. They react to her with terror. They cry for their real mother. The alternate universe Wanda who raised them, who is not this woman, who is not the burning thing that has just materialized in front of them. That moment, two children recoiling from their mother in fear, is the moment the story has been building toward, not the massacres, not the power demonstrations. This, a woman who has spent months or years doing unspeakable things because she wanted to be a mother, finally in front of her children, and finding that what she has become in the process of getting there is exactly the thing that makes them afraid of her. She sees herself, not in a mirror, in their faces, in the specific quality of their fear, which is the fear of a monster, not the fear of a stranger. Wanda dissolves the possession. She returns to her own body, and she goes to Wundagore Mountain, the place of her birth, the place where Chthon's essence is said to be bound in the stone, the source of the Darkhold's physical power in the world. She destroys every copy of the Darkhold across every universe, and then she brings the mountain down upon herself. The film does not show a body. There is rubble, and there is a brief shot of red light fading. The door is deliberately not sealed. Official MCU materials have described her as ending two great threats to the multiverse, but the presentation is ambiguous. The Marvel habit of leaving that door open is doing its usual work. What is clear from the evidence, from the structure of what she chose to do and why, is that the act was not nihilistic. She was not ending herself because she had no reason to continue. She was ending the Darkhold because she understood, finally, what it had cost her and what it would continue to cost everyone around her if she let it persist. She was ending Wundagore because Wundagore was the anchor of that power in the physical world. She was doing the one thing she could still do that was unambiguously correct. She was, in the cleanest possible terms, using her power to remove rather than to create, because she had learned what she creates when she creates without restraint. There is something worth examining in how the audience responded to WandaVision while it was airing, because the response tells you something about Wanda that the show itself does not say directly. The series premiered to a level of theorizing and speculation that the MCU had not previously generated. Every week, after each episode dropped, a certain portion of the audience was not asking what is Wanda going through, they were asking who is pulling the strings. The assumption, built from years of Marvel narrative convention, was that Wanda could not be the author of her own situation. Someone had to be doing this to her. Someone had to be the real villain. The grief construct, the sitcom world, the impossible children, it was simply too elaborate, too strange, too costly for a single person to have built it. There had to be a Mephisto. There had to be a puppet master. There was not. The 5th episode of WandaVision, on a very special episode, aired February 5, 2021, is the one where the show makes this explicit in the most provocative way it can. The front door to Wanda and Vision's house opens, and standing on the porch is Pietro. Not the MCU Pietro. Not Aaron Taylor Johnson's version of the character who died in Age of Ultron. Evan Peters. The actor who played a different version of Quicksilver in Fox's X-Men films. A completely separate franchise, a separate continuity, a character who was never part of the MCU's official history and who appeared in a run of films that existed under a different studio's ownership. The audience response was immediate and enormous. The theories converged on the same basic reading. This was the multiverse. Evan Peters' Pietro was proof that WandaVision was going to be the entry point for Fox's X-Men into the MCU's canonical reality. Magneto might show up. The mutants from a decade and a half of Fox films might finally exist in the same universe as the Avengers. The excitement was, by measurable social media metrics, unprecedented for the show. The show's answer to all of that, when it arrived in episode 7, was no. Evan Peters' Pietro was a random Westview resident named Ralph Boner, a name constructed entirely as a crude joke. He had been possessed by Agatha Harkness and used as a prop. The character had no connection to any Pietro Maximoff from any universe. He was a prank. The look-alike casting was a deliberate misdirect, and Agatha's reveal at the end of that same episode was the actual twist the show had been building toward. The fan response to this was, depending on your perspective, either a reasonable disappointment or an illustration of how thoroughly certain sections of the Marvel audience had been trained to expect a specific kind of storytelling. My honest reading is that it is both, and that both readings say more about the audience than about the show. The interpretation that WandaVision was fundamentally about grief, about a woman who missed her dead partner so much that she accidentally built an entire reality around a simulacrum of him, was available from the first episode. But grief is not a Marvel-scale plot twist. Grief does not have a hidden villain. Grief does not resolve with a final battle. The part of the audience that needed a Mephisto or a multiverse crossover was the part that could not quite accept that the person doing this to Westview was Wanda herself, alone, with no external manipulation except the chaos of her own power. Agatha was there. She was real. She was feeding on the chaos magic and nudging the situation toward more production of it. But she did not create the hex. She found it already existing, and she moved into the opportunity it presented. The source was always Wanda. The story was always about what a person does when their grief has no container that reality can provide. The Agatha All Along jingle, the musical number that played over the reveal in episode 7, composed for the show, became one of the most unexpectedly viral cultural moments of 2021. A villain origin song for an ancient witch in a Marvel Disney Plus series, performed in the style of a 60s television theme, became the sound of that cultural moment. It won a Creative Arts Emmy for original music and lyrics. It is the kind of detail that defies easy categorization. Funny and catchy and also somehow genuinely unsettling, which is exactly what the character it was written for is. 23 Primetime Emmy nominations for WandaVision. Near the top of the pile that year, alongside The Crown and The Mandalorian, Elizabeth Olsen, Paul Bettany, and Kathryn Hahn were all individually nominated for acting. The nominations were not just a commercial metric. They were a formal recognition that what had been made was not a superhero story that occasionally touched on grief, but a grief story that happened to be about superheroes, and that the distinction was visible to people whose job it is to evaluate the quality of performed emotion. The world outside the Hex changed too. Monica Rambeau, who crossed the Hex boundary multiple times and was physically transformed by the process at a molecular level, emerged with abilities that the series did not fully define. Her story, a woman whose mother, Maria Rambeau, died of cancer while Monica was erased by the Snap, who came back 5 years later to a world where her mother was already gone, runs parallel to Wanda's grief in a way the show notes without belaboring. Both of them lost someone while they were somewhere they could not help it. Both of them are trying to figure out what that loss means for who they are now. There is a way of reading the Illuminati sequence in Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness that is not about spectacle. The Illuminati of Earth 838 are a council of the most powerful heroes in their universe. Reed Richards, Black Bolt, Captain Carter, Professor X, and versions of characters the audience has seen elsewhere in other forms. They have assembled in response to the threat that Wanda represents, and they have a plan for how to handle her. They are going to contain her. They have the authority and the capability, in their judgment, and they are going to exercise it. Every single one of them dies. There is a specific reading of this sequence that the film does not offer explicitly, but that the structure supports. The Illuminati are not wrong to see Wanda as a threat. They are wrong about what their plan will cost them. They are wrong the same way that the Avengers and X-Men were wrong in House of M. They have assembled to deal with a woman in crisis, and their plan for dealing with her is one that does not acknowledge the full measure of what she is capable of. They know she is dangerous. They do not know how dangerous. Nobody ever does, in any version of this story, because the ceiling of what Wanda can do keeps being higher than what anyone expected. Reed Richards, played briefly by John Krasinski, in a piece of casting chosen specifically to satisfy fan wishes, dies. He dies in the manner of someone who believed intelligence could substitute for preparation. He tries to reason with her, to talk her through the full implications of her plan. She thanks him for explaining how to handle his powers and then demonstrates that she was paying attention by killing him with his own elastic body turned against him. Professor X, in his yellow hoverchair from the animated X-Men series, approaches her with the gentlest possible intervention. directly into her mind, trying to reach the Wanda who is still somewhere underneath the Darkhold corruption. He nearly succeeds. For a moment, the broken version of her is visible, and the real her is visible through it, and it seems like it might be enough. Then the corrupted consciousness snaps back and takes him with it. The horror of this sequence is not the deaths. The horror is that every approach fails, not because they are bad approaches exactly, but because they are approaches for a situation that is still primarily about Wanda as a person, as someone who can be reasoned with, contained, reached, de-escalated. And the Darkhold has removed the part of her that was accessible to those interventions. The Wanda who could be talked down is still in there. The Professor X scene proves it. But the Darkhold is between her and anyone trying to get to her, and the Darkhold is not negotiable. What this means, structurally, is that the film makes a case for why Wanda herself is the only person who can stop Wanda. Not because she is too powerful for anyone else, though she is, but because the intervention that actually works is the one that reaches through the Darkhold to the mother underneath, and that can only come from her children. Not from a superhero or a sage, from two small boys who look at her and are afraid. The story does not end there. Stories about characters this deeply embedded in a mythology never end cleanly. Agatha All Along, which premiered on September 18, 2024, is a 9-episode Disney Plus series centered on Catherine Hahn's Agatha Harkness. Still trapped in Westview under the memory hex Wanda placed on her at the end of WandaVision's finale, she escapes, with help from a mysterious teenager who refuses to share his name and who turns out, in the course of the series, to be Billy Kaplan, William Kaplan, the MCU's version of the boy who was, in the comics, the reincarnated soul of Wanda's son. 3 years have passed since WandaVision. Wanda is gone, described in Agatha All Along as absent rather than confirmed dead, which is exactly the framing you choose when you want to leave the door open. Billy is alive. He is here. He found his way to Westview, to the place where his origin in this universe begins, to the witch who is the closest living connection to the woman who, in some sense, made him. The series received positive critical reception. Catherine Hahn earned a Golden Globe nomination for her performance. It is positioned as the second entry in what has been described as a WandaVision trilogy, with Vision Quest, announced for Disney Plus with Paul Bettany returning, as the trilogy's conclusion. Vision Quest will follow White Vision, the original body, the one who flew away after the Ship of Theseus argument in the WandaVision finale, as he attempts to reconnect with his memories and understand what he is in, the absence of the chaos magic and grief that defined Hex Vision's existence. It is, at its core, the story of someone asking whether they are still who they were when the thing that defined them is gone. Vision without Wanda. The White Vision, who has all the memories but not the feeling of having lived them, trying to find his way back to something real. Which is, in its way, a mirror of what Wanda's entire story has always been. She is a person who keeps trying to find her way back to something real, through chaos magic and probability manipulation and the sheer force of wanting it to be true. The Hex was the most extreme version of that impulse. Westview was her trying to find her way back to vision, to family, to a life that felt the way the American sitcoms promised life could feel. It was unreal. It was built from grief and power and delusion. And inside it, for a few weeks, she had something real enough that dismantling it cost her more than anything she had ever survived. As of the present, Elizabeth Olsen has said publicly that she is stepping away from the MCU for other projects, and there is no official confirmation from Marvel Studios that she will return in the multiverse saga's remaining films. That leaves everything about a possible return to speculation. Fans have speculated, rumors have circulated, but the confirmed truth is that Wanda's story sits, as of now, at the collapsed mountain in Multiverse of Madness, with the door narrowly open and no one able to say for certain whether it will be walked through. What is not speculative is the legacy. There is something the MCU did with Vision and Wanda's relationship that the films never fully credited themselves with doing well. It is easy to focus on the spectacle of their story, the Infinity War sacrifice, the WandaVision grief construct, the ship of Theseus debate. But the foundation of why any of that lands as hard as it does was built in quieter moments that the films moved through without drawing much attention to them. In Captain America: Civil War, while the larger drama of the Sokovia Accords and the airport battle occupied most of the film's attention, there is a scene where Wanda is in the Avengers compound under Vision's watch. She is not imprisoned at this point. She is technically free, but the compound represents a kind of soft containment, an understanding that her presence in public spaces is politically complicated after Lagos. She is making paprikash. It is a dish from Eastern Europe, a comfort food, a connection to a home that no longer exists in the form she knew it. Vision materializes through the wall, as he does, and they talk. The scene is brief. It does not declare anything about their relationship, but Vision's curiosity about the food, the careful attention he gives to understanding something he cannot eat, but which matters to someone he cares about, is the most precise image of what their relationship is. He is trying to understand her, not her powers, not her value on a team, her, the specific cultural object she is holding, the warmth it represents, the history it carries. He moves toward her specific humanity, with the full attention of a being who has no cultural framework for what she is offering, but who finds it worth the effort of learning. That is the relationship. That is what Infinity War is destroying when Thanos uses the Time Stone to reverse Vision's death and kill him again. Not just a love story in the generic romantic sense. The particular texture of being known by someone who had to work to understand you, who could not take for granted the things humans take for granted about each other because he was not human, and who did that work anyway, because you were worth it. The Edinburgh sequence in Infinity War gives them a single moment of ordinary life before everything breaks. They are walking in a city. They are not Avengers at that moment. They are two people who have found something in each other that neither of them had access to before. The attack by the Black Order arrives almost immediately, which is the film's deliberate choice, to show you what they have and then to begin taking it within a single sequence. You never see them have more than a few minutes of the ordinary life they are trying to build. The ordinary life was always the point, not the powers, not the significance, just the paprikash and the Edinburgh street and the version of themselves that existed when no one needed them to be extraordinary. The loss of that ordinary life, specifically that, not the abstract concept of loss, but the loss of something as specific and unglamorous as cooking dinner for someone who cannot eat it, is what drives everything that follows. The Hex is a monument to ordinary life. It is built in the specific aesthetic of American television domesticity because domesticity is what Wanda wanted and never got enough of. The sitcom house, the sitcom neighborhood, the sitcom husband, these are not aspirational fantasies for Wanda. They are the life she was trying to have when Thanos interrupted it. They are the shape of what she lost. There is also something worth understanding about Agatha Harkness as a character, not just as a plot mechanism in WandaVision, but as a figure who illuminates Wanda by contrast. Agatha Harkness is extremely old. In the MCU's version of her history, she was nearly executed by her coven in Salem in the 17th century for practicing magic beyond the coven's sanctioned limits. She survived because she was more powerful than all of them combined. She has spent several centuries since then accumulating power and knowledge, moving through the world of witchcraft with an expertise that no currently living witch can match. And yet, for all of that accumulated power and knowledge, Agatha cannot do what Wanda does. She cannot generate chaos magic. She cannot reshape reality. She can study it, drain it, feed on it when it is being produced, but she cannot produce it herself. The thing that makes the Scarlet Witch singular, the thing the Darkhold calls a destiny to destroy the world, is something Agatha has spent her long life trying to understand because she will never have it. This creates a relationship between them that is not simply mentor and student, or villain and hero, or rival and equal. It is something more like the relationship between a craftsperson and a natural phenomenon. Agatha has mastered her craft through centuries of practice. Wanda is rain. You cannot learn to be rain. You can study it, try to channel it, try to get close to where it falls. But the thing itself is not available to you through effort or study or centuries of accumulated knowledge. What Agatha wants from Wanda, underneath the scheming, is not power exactly. It is the answer to the question of what it feels like to be what Wanda is. To have that kind of power not as something earned, but as something you are. Agatha has been working for it her entire long life. Wanda was born with it, did not ask for it, spent most of her existence not fully understanding it, and would probably have traded it for an ordinary life in Sokovia, with her parents still alive. The bitterness in that gap is palpable in their scenes together. Agatha is competent and ambitious and ancient, and she will never be the Scarlet Witch. Wanda is the Scarlet Witch, and she keeps trying not to be. There is a specific kind of tragedy that Wanda Maximoff represents that is different from the tragedy of most fictional characters. Most tragic figures are destroyed by a single fundamental flaw, by pride, by ambition, by love turned possessive, by the inability to accept loss. Their tragedy has a single clean cause, which is what makes them comprehensible and which is why the structure of tragedy as a genre was built around that kind of singular causation. Wanda's tragedy has no single cause. Every piece of it is legitimate. Every loss is real. Every decision she made in response to those losses was understandable from inside the situation, even when it was catastrophic from outside it. The magic she was given at birth was not a blessing she asked for. The parents she lost were taken by a specific corporate weapon she did not have the power to prevent. The brother she loved was killed before she could reach him. The husband she built a life with was dismantled by people afraid of what he represented, rebuilt as an empty copy, then killed twice in the same afternoon. The children she created from chaos magic were revealed to be fragments of a demon's soul. The memory of those children was taken from her to spare her the grief. The grief found another way out. At every step, something is being done to Wanda Maximoff. Not by her, not by her choices, by the machinery of a universe that seems to require her to have lost everything in order to be as powerful as she is. The power that makes her the Scarlet Witch, that makes her, according to the Darkhold, more powerful than the Sorcerer Supreme, more powerful than any being born to ordinary reality, was forged in those losses. Not just enabled by them, forged. The losses are constitutive. She is what she is because of what was taken. Think about what that means. The power she has, the power that saved her own life at 10 years old, the power that gutted mutant kind, the power that created the Hex and everything inside it. That power exists in its current form because of Chthon's mark on her at birth, because of the Stark shell, because of the Hydra experiments, because of Pietro's death, because of Vision dying in her hands. All of it contributed to making her what she is. All of it was also genuinely terrible. The most powerful woman in the Marvel Universe is powerful because the most terrible things kept happening to her. The story has never offered Wanda a world where she gets to be powerful and also okay. She gets to be one or the other. When she is powerful in the way the story requires her to be, when she is operating at the level that justifies her place at the center of the MCU's largest narrative arcs, she is in the middle of grief so acute that reality itself cannot contain it. When she is okay, when she is Wanda in the suburbs, Wanda in Edinburgh, Wanda cooking paprikash for Vision in a tiny apartment, she is not the Scarlet Witch. She is just a person trying to have a life. The tragedy of Wanda Maximoff is not that she destroyed things. It is that she kept trying to build things, over and over, with whatever she had left, in whatever universe the story placed her, and the universe kept finding new ways to take them from her. Not out of cruelty exactly. Universes are not cruel because they are not intentional. But the structural pattern, across 60 years of comics history and across a decade and a half of the MCU, is the same. Something is given, and then something is taken, and Wanda is left holding the space where it used to be. And yet she keeps going. She kept going after Pietro. She kept going after Vision the first time, and the second time, and the third time. She kept going after losing the children she did not know she had lost, and after losing the children she made to replace them, and after losing the version of herself that could have been a mother. She destroyed the Darkhold and brought down Wundagore, not because she was giving up, but because it was the most powerful thing she could do with what she still had. Wanda Maximoff is not, finally, a tragedy about loss. She is a story about the persistence of the person who is doing the losing, about what it looks like to survive the unsurvivable and then survive the next unsurvivable thing, and the one after that. The survival is not triumphant. It does not look like the end of a superhero film. It looks like a woman alone in a cabin on a mountain, in astral form, studying a book she knows will corrupt her, hearing the voices of children she already said goodbye to, and not knowing yet whether she has the strength to not go to them. That is the whole story. Not the powers, not the battles, the moment before the decision. The question that never fully resolves. Billy and Tommy are out there, somewhere in the multiverse. In the MCU version, the Billy who exists is Billy Kaplan, the teenager from Agatha All Along who found his way to Westview, who helped Agatha escape the memory hex, who is learning what his power is and what his name means in the mythology he has walked into. In the comics version, Wiccan and Speed have been central figures in multiple Young Avengers stories, their identities as Wanda's reincarnated sons now formally accepted, their own heroic careers unfolding independent of the catastrophes that defined their first existence. The souls of Billy and Tommy Maximoff did not disappear when Mephisto reabsorbed them. They came back, not as the same children, not in the same form, but with enough continuity of essential self that the people who knew them can recognize them. That persistence is, in its small and specific way, the counter-argument to everything tragic in Wanda's story. Not a happy ending, not a resolution, a counter-argument. Things that are lost are not always gone. Sometimes they come back in forms that are harder to recognize but no less real. Vision is searching for what he is without her. Agatha is loose in the world. The Darkhold is gone. The Scarlet Witch title lives in a lineage that predates Wanda and will outlast whatever any single version of her does or refuses to do. And Wanda Maximoff, born in Sokovia, on a mountain older than civilization, forged in grief and loss and love and magic, is still the most powerful being in the room, whichever room she is standing in. So let yourself drift now, if you have not already. The story is here, and it will be here again tomorrow, and the next night, waiting quietly if you want to come back to it. There is no more Wanda tonight than the version who chose to bring the mountain down. And that, in the end, is the version worth carrying to sleep. Someone who kept losing and kept trying, and, at the last, used what she had left to remove the thing that would have kept hurting people. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.